In February, we saw the results of the federal election with the Christian Democratic Party coming out on top. Almost as a close second was the AfD, the Alternative für Deutschland, a party that has consistently made use of Nazi election strategies, Nazi flyers, Nazi slogans. Certain members of such party even proudly identifying with those labels, right? We're seeing mistakes that we have sworn as a nation to never repeat being repeated, and this time, the Americans are not going to be here to help to restore the free and democratic constitutional order. They are the ones interfering to destroy it. And I'm not being hyperbolic here. Do believe me, I know that those Nazi comparisons have been exhausted and overused by all sides for a very long time, such as that they have lost their shock value. I know that. I understand that we are all tired of it and that ultimately it only serves the real Nazis when they come back for a free and constitutional order. I understand that we are all tired of it and that ultimately this will only serve the real Nazis when they come back for our free and democratic constitutional order. That is because we will inevitably be perceived at that point as the boy who cried wolf. What I'm talking about, however, is a party that openly takes and recycles slogans, flyers, campaign strategies, as I said, of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, also known for short as the Nazi Party. The points of continuation that I'm about to bring up here are not simple points of similarity. It's not just about hardcore nationalism or racism or authoritarianism, which can be applied in many dictatorial movements and of course are extremely concerning by themselves. But what I am talking about here is the deliberate revival and imitation of the Nazi tradition. That is in a manner that no reasonable observer would ascribe to coincidental similarity here. Of course, again, the party that I'm talking about is Germany's far-right nationalist party, the AfD, the Alternative für Deutschland. I will demonstrate to you the point of unmistakable inspiration from the original Nazis and then perhaps zoom out to the threat to the constitutional democratic order of the free world and how it will affect all of us if not stopped. And perhaps at the end ponder how freedom may be defended both collectively and also institutionally. So starting with Exhibit A. Nazi flyers. During the run-up of the 2025 federal election, the AfD handed out flyers with the title Deportation Ticket. On it says passenger, illegal immigrant, one-way ticket, and destination, safe country of origin to people who are brown, black, or otherwise look foreign. They distributed them in the mailboxes of individuals and families with names that seem foreign as well. And this was not some local rogue group that was acting independently as some people might claim, but this was de facto endorsed and posted about by high-level party officials, particularly demonstrated through this specific campaign being presented at the main party convention in Riesa last year. So even though the main party leadership may have said that they don't have anything to do with this officially, this circled around and was repeated in multiple different locations from the original location of Karlsruhe there, right? Now, this is not only as disgusting and openly racist as a campaign stunt can possibly get, but it is clearly modeled on this flyer, which the Nazis handed out to Jewish-looking people. It says on it, free ticket to Jerusalem, valid at any German train station, and one-way ticket. Now, to point out the obvious, of course, neither of them are real tickets. There is no train from Germany to Jerusalem, and you also can't tell somebody's residency by the way that they look or their last name on a mailbox. That goes without saying. But just as we are seeing with Trump's targeting of ethnically diverse, documented and legal residents not convicted of any wrongdoing whatsoever, the illegal immigrants bit is nothing more than a flimsy excuse here. What this is about in both cases is the illegal reinstitutionalization of racism as government policy, in the case of the AfD, through the tried and true methods of the Nazi Party. So moving on to Exhibit B. Nazi slogans. Meet this guy here, Björn Höcke, the leader of the most powerful political party in the state of Thuringia. In May of 2021, police in Sachsen-Anhalt started investigating Höcke for using this slogan during a speech. Quote, "Alles für Deutschland," end quote. It is a slogan that was once used by the Nazi SS paramilitary, which is banned in Germany today, of course. When he was asked about this on multiple occasions, including in court, he claimed to have no idea where the phrase came from, and yet he instigated himself as a victim of government censorship, and instead of trying to obscure his supposed ignorance of German history, having previously been a history teacher himself, he made it a central point of his rallies. He repeated it over and over again in reference to the incidents, supposedly, and he transformed it into his own slogan to be repeated by his crowd.
Alles für unsere Heimat, alles für Sachsen-Anhalt, alles für...
May and July of 2024, the first incident incurred a conviction and a fine of 13,000 euro, and the second one of just under 17,000. Now, this was not the first nor the last of such incidents where he demonstrated the crossing of the gradient between simple dog whistling and overt incitement. I will circle back to how this connects to the main federal body of the party, to demonstrate just how much this is indeed representative of the party as a whole. But continuing on what I was saying about the crossing of that gradient between simple dog whistling and overt incitement, I think a perfect case study for this would be his book titled Never Twice in the Same River, or in German, Nie zweimal im selben Fluss. There he traverses that gradient forwards and backwards repeatedly and gracefully, and where many passages are truly indistinguishable from the writings of Adolf Hitler himself. For example, in the context of the beginning chapters of the book, loaded with thinly veiled insinuation that Germany remains today under occupation since its end of the Second World War, that it should free itself from international cooperation structures such as NATO and the EU and arise as a military superpower in its own right. He said the following in dialogue with a retired general as the latter floated the idea of a military coup and whether it would be a practicable possibility. Quote, "Even though the lieutenant colonel certainly misspoke in that statement, it illustrates the growing frustration of many soldiers. It remains to be seen whether this will lead to any positive consequences, because truly heretical positions have so far only, and that in itself is telling, come from retired generals. I therefore fear no." Now, this of course reflects Höcke's general theme of institutional conformity and suppressed nationalist dissent. Let me present to you another quote here, for instance. Quote, "Even though unfortunately we may lose some parts of our people who are too weak or unwilling to resist the advancing Africanization, Orientalization, and Islamization, but aside from this potential bloodletting, we Germans have demonstrated exceptional regenerative strength throughout history after dramatic declines. When the time for change arrives, we Germans don't do half measures." End quote. Here I would like to shift your focus to the used word bloodletting, in German Adalas, in conjugation with the word people, or Volk in German. The talk here is plainly about the elimination of Germans who are not willing to work with the author's racist agenda through the use of metaphorical language very deeply rooted in the National Socialist tradition of purifying the blood of the people, as well as the metaphor for the people as one body that you might need to clear of infections, that being foreigners, right, or parasites is a way that Jews were talked about back then, talking about bloodletting parts of the folk's body, the people's body that has been corrupted and must be gotten rid of. Really, I mean, if you have any knowledge about National Socialist ideology, metaphorical language, and worldviews, this should ring all the alarms for you. And I mean, somebody who talks like that is a Nazi, period. There's no way around it. And of course, also the phrase about no half measures also carries some very heavy historical undertones. Let me present to you one last quote here. Quote, "In addition to protecting our national and European external borders, a large-scale remigration project will be necessary. And in this, I fear, we will not be able to avoid a policy of what Peter Sturdivec called well-tempered cruelty. That means human hardship and unpleasant scenes will not always be avoidable." End quote. Now, I would like to use this opportunity to point something out, even though I feel like this quote can't stand by itself. What I want to point out is how the dogmatic ideology of hardcore nationalism and national borders can go too far in instances where you know that there is war, there is genocide, or some very serious life-threatening conditions threatening people if they are turned back. And this is simply taken as a cost to be accepted after the Second World War, and especially in consideration of the Jews that were turned back from America and other places only to be exterminated during the Holocaust. We saw the horrors that came from that, and we also realized that we are entirely capable of avoiding those horrendous scenes of human hardship, at least in some cases where those people are asking for help, right? So of course it is not a question of whether those things are avoidable within this framework. It's a question of whether you want to hold on to an antiquated concept of nationhood at the cost of your humanity. In any case, there is far more to learn about this character and his followers in the AfD, and much more to debate about how mainstream his wing in the party is, but it should be reasonable to any observer that this tendency is gaining and not losing influence within the party. This, on a final note, should be demonstrable of this fact. In response to a controversial speech that Höcke gave in Dresden in 2017, where he referred to the Holocaust Memorial in Berlin as a monument of shame and called for a 180-degree turn in Germany's remembrance culture. The Federal Party leadership, including Weidel, accused Höcke of exhibiting a, quote, excessive closeness to National Socialism, and a, quote, fundamental rejection of the party system. Upon this, they initiated proceedings to expel Höcke from the party, which ultimately failed after internal party deliberation, which was one of the events that showed that the party really has no internal mechanism to exclude the most extreme of far-right anti-democratic forces. Weidel has now come closer to Höcke and reportedly looks back at this as a mistake. When asked about this incident now, she would defend Höcke by saying that, well, he wins the party votes, which, okay, this is true, But do consider the question. Now, if this type of behavior is what mobilizes your party's base, then what does that say about the intellectual tradition that your party is built on? And let alone what it says about your own integrity. That you seem to be following his lead upon the success of those methods, what does that say about you? It might not mean that you are a convicted Nazi yourself, but it certainly does mean that you're willing to make common cause with them, even when you undeniably know what their intentions are, right? Furthermore, Höcke and the party leadership, including Alice Weidel, call the mentioned court ruling about the mentioned slogan a farce and a smear campaign, still insisting that he didn't know about the history of the slogan despite having been a history teacher, as I said, doing it repeatedly. Yet in a very, very cheeky move as our last government collapsed, the federal representation of the party decided on a new slogan for the party, which was Alice für Deutschland. But this one has nothing to do with the Nazis, by the way. It's Alice, not Alice. Alice, because Alice Weidel. Yeah, it's very subtle. I know, at least subtle enough that we don't have any active prosecutions surrounding this yet. Hey, looking at the way that things are going, you can always use the Nazi slogan now with plausible deniability, because, well, it sounds similar enough to the completely democratic and honest, like, the slogan with no Nazi associations whatsoever, Alice für Deutschland, right? Yeah, this is where we're at. And they came out as the second strongest party at 20% in the last election, yeah. Hello 2025, I'm sure this is gonna be a wonderful fucking year. I mean, okay, the year is almost... half of the year is gone, but it doesn't look to be getting any better, to be honest. Exhibit C. A Nazi insurrection. In August of 2020, a group of right-wing conspiracy theorists, some carrying flags of the former German Empire, QAnon, among other movements, as well as so-called Reichsbürger. Those are Germans who consider themselves subject to the German Empire and dispute the legitimacy of the modern German nation-state. As that group tried to storm the German parliament building at the time, they overwhelmed the small police force that was present at the time, before fortunately finally being held back by reinforcements. Between 300 and 400 arrests were made that day, including a former AfD member of parliament, Brigitte Malsack-Winkelmann, who is being held for allegedly sharing plans and insider knowledge about the security situation inside of the Bundestag. As of the end of last year, it seems, according to credible intelligence reports from institutes such as Stern and RTL, that current members of parliament from this party still visit her in prison. Now granted, this was a very, very weird plot, a mix of Nazis, Reichsbürger, anti-vax conspiracists, as well as QAnon-adjacent Trump loyalists who spread rumors about Trump arriving in Berlin on a megaphone. And although this operation was a complete failure and there is granted no evidence of high-level party planning from the side of the AfD, there's also no denying the close relationship that this party has to extremist conspiracy and Reichsbürger movements that openly strive to dismantle democracy, and that they will betray their country whenever given their opportunity. Another key element of this that I think is worth paying attention to is the Trump connection, which is not only bizarre but also quite significant in relation to the January 6th insurrection that happened in Washington just a few months later, as well as how it foreshadowed the 2024 and 25 heavy-handed interference by the Trump campaign and administration within German politics, under which efforts, especially with figures such as J.D. Vance and Elon Musk, their efforts were focused on rehabilitating and promoting neo-Nazis and other extremists and to rehabilitate them into polite society, which truly has been successful very widely in his efforts. Elon Musk's use of his obscene wealth is largely what made this endeavor possible. He actively boosted and promoted the AfD on X, the global communications platform which he bought for the precise purpose of controlling the flow of information and publicly accepted narrative across the world. Musk has also, for some years preceding that, been cultivating a relationship with the largest media conglomerate in Europe, the Axel Springer SE, and its CEO, Matthias Döpfner, another far-right billionaire with an axe to grind against liberal democracy.